When everyone is financially equal, does society collapse? In a seemingly perfect world, where poverty no longer exists, humanity felt it had nearly achieved absolute equality. But can there truly be a perfect society when such change gives rise to new and complex problems? In the year 2091, the global government introduced a strange law that completely altered the way society operates. This law mandated that anyone possessing assets exceeding $1 million must give away 50% of their wealth to those earning less than $10,000 annually at the end of each year. Beneath the surface of what appeared to be a humanitarian decision, the law began to create a deep division within society. Each year, the wealth of the rich was cut in half, preventing them from maintaining the affluence they once had. At first, this seemed like a brilliant solution to eliminate inequality and offer new opportunities for the underprivileged. But upon closer inspection, unforeseen consequences began to surface. Companies and large businesses struggled to stay afloat. Creativity and innovation declined as the wealthy no longer had the resources to invest in new ideas. So the question arises, does wealth redistribution truly lead to a fairer and happier society, or does it simply plunge everything into chaos and uncontrollable complexity? At first, when the wealth redistribution law was introduced, society underwent a dramatic transformation. The poor no longer had to worry about food or clothing. They had money to cover their living expenses and access to quality healthcare and education. Children no longer had to drop out of school due to financial hardship. Instead, they received full education and built a solid foundation for their future. Houses sprang up everywhere, forming bustling and modern new urban areas. Communities became more united. Businesses began focusing on serving the needs of the people, and the divide between rich and poor seemed to disappear. Successful individuals, wealthy entrepreneurs, were no longer seen as enemies or oppressors, but rather admired as role models. They were the ones creating jobs and improving the standard of living for society. People encouraged one another and dreamed of a fair society where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. However, that joy didn't last long. By the end of the first year, things began to change. The wealthy realized something frightening. The more money they made, the more they had to give away. This gradually became a burden for those with large assets. They couldn't keep what they earned, and over time, wealth was no longer a source of pride. It became a responsibility, a sin, for which they had to pay the price of their success. Consequences quickly emerged. Some people, instead of starting businesses and striving to become wealthy, chose to maintain their current financial state, avoiding advancement for fear of being punished at the end of the year. Creative minds and geniuses began to withdraw into silence. They didn't want to face giving up the wealth they had worked so hard to build, as it not only cost them effort, but also reduced their ability to keep developing. Creative talent gradually dwindled, and new projects stopped being initiated. Innovation and the motivation to work declined because people no longer had the drive to strive for more. And so, the society that once seemed equal and full of hope began to show cracks. The wealthy and talented became increasingly isolated, and creativity and the desire for progress faded. Is this the price society must pay to maintain fairness? As motivation to strive forward faded, society began to stagnate. A sense of injustice and exhaustion spread among those who had once worked tirelessly to achieve success. The wealthy no longer wanted to create new value or grow their businesses, because every step forward came at too high a price. Society seemed frozen, no one wanted to take risks, and no one dared to innovate. Meanwhile, the wise began finding ways to hide their assets to avoid redistribution. Underground, dark crypto systems emerged, allowing the wealthy to store their wealth without being tracked. Secret transactions and covert exchanges became increasingly common, and large corporations also sought ways to bypass the law to maintain financial control. Creativity was no longer just about ideas. It became a matter of inventing ways to evade taxes and protect personal wealth. Some wealthy individuals, unable to bear the pressure of mandatory redistribution, chose to leave society altogether. They sought to migrate to free zones, regions exempt from the asset-sharing law. These were isolated areas with different legal frameworks where they could continue accumulating wealth without the fear of redistribution. These lands became havens for the rich, where they could reclaim the economic freedom they had lost. To combat this situation, the government mobilized asset hunters, specialized teams tasked with tracking down those avoiding their redistribution duties. Raids and arrests became key operations of the authorities, while citizens and entrepreneurs began to feel as though they were living in a surveillance society where every financial move was closely monitored. A silent war broke out, not between nations or social classes, but between forced equality and economic freedom. The government and those who supported the wealth-sharing system clashed with those fighting to protect their financial liberty. This was no longer just a conflict over money, but a battle of values and individual rights in a society divided by unchangeable laws. The equal distribution of wealth, though seemingly fair, did not create true equality. On the contrary, it killed human ambition. At first, people rejoiced over the social benefits brought by the law, but gradually, individual effort lost its value. Instead of working hard, being creative, or starting a business, people now had only one goal: to wait until the end of the year to receive their share of the money. They no longer saw the need to work diligently, because no matter what they did, whether they succeeded or failed, the end result would still be a portion of their wealth taken away. The sense of guaranteed income from others stripped them of the motivation to rise. Those who were once symbols of effort, innovation, and entrepreneurial spirit were now seen by society as greedy. They were criticized for trying to maintain their wealth, as such efforts were no longer considered reasonable in a society built on equality. Inventors and renowned entrepreneurs were no longer respected as they deserved. Instead, they were condemned and pushed into isolation, while those who did nothing still received a share of the wealth. What was once called fairness now fostered a deeply unjust society where individual effort was no longer valued. Without motivation, society began to stagnate. New inventions and groundbreaking technologies stopped emerging. Businesses, once the driving force of the economy, gradually went bankrupt or could no longer remain competitive. No one wanted to invest in new ideas because they knew their success would be taken away, and no one had the incentive to take risks anymore. Creative companies and bold projects were abandoned. A society that once brimmed with potential for innovation now became a collection of outdated systems with no drive for renewal. And when everyone becomes equal, the big question arises: who will still want to move forward? When there is no distinction between those who work hard and those who do nothing, who will still hold on to their aspirations? The price of forced equality is the extinguishing of ambition, the loss of the drive to create and progress. In the end, after prolonged upheaval and instability, the government decided to abolish the wealth redistribution law. This decision brought joy to some, as they could return to a life of freedom without being forced to share their assets. However, a significant portion of the population was outraged, believing that the fairness they had once dreamed of had now been shattered. They felt that the wealthy would once again gain the upper hand, while the poor would continue to live in deprivation. The world began to fall back into the cycle of wealth and poverty, where those with means continued to accumulate assets, and the poor still struggled to survive. Old conflicts resurfaced, yet no one had a clear answer to the question: what does true fairness mean? Is fairness the equal distribution of wealth so that everyone receives an equal share? Or is fairness the opportunity for each individual to create their own value, where personal effort is rewarded accordingly? And if, in today's world, there were a law requiring the redistribution of 50% of wealth every year, would it be a paradise or a nightmare? This question remains open-ended, leaving each of us to reflect on how we build a just society, one where everyone has opportunity, but without losing the ambition and effort to rise.